On 15th of November 2025, I sent 2 emails to the mathematics departments of UBC and SFU. In these emails, I briefly stated my serious familial issues during my associate and bachelor's degree and the Hong Kong political and global pandemic upheaval in 2020 to explain why I only got a 2.721 GPA on a 4.0 scale when I was at HKUST. I told them why I had been working in various industries over the years. I had never stopped learning pure mathematics independently, and now that I've become a Canadian permanent resident, I believe I had the stability to return to academia. Then, I further asked them whether, given my background in physics and engineering, there was a path to help me achieve that, such as a non-degree study path or a qualifying year. Truth be told, I was kind of lost during that time. I had been half a year since I was fired by the high school where I was teaching. The principal's reason? Because the grades of a bunch of grade 11 students looked bad in my mathematics class. While mathematics is a discipline of precision and rigor, the BC curriculum actively encourages students to write down sloppy, half-logical steps on paper, and expects teachers to still hand out full marks just because the direction of problem solving is sort of correct. Instead of expecting students to write flawlessly, it is okay for them to write a bunch of spaghetti as long as the ideas make sense. As someone who takes mathematics seriously, I could not accept it at all. A couple of students still managed to get an overall 90% or above from me, but the majority of them hover around 65 to 75%, with a few exceptions who did not even hand in their homework and failed the course. Maybe I deserved it, with the class consisting of an Iranian who always sneaked her phone into the classroom to talk to her friend, a Malaysian who rarely showed up to class, a Japanese who basically gave up on learning, a couple of students who heavily rely on AI or their classmates to do simple factorization, and a bunch of Chinese students who could not read English properly. I still did not go the extra mile to visit each of them and their families after school, lure them to learn simple algebra like taming toddlers, and commence a motivational science project to let them rediscover math by themselves. But I also have to give credit to a few students in that class. During that period, the top student always helped me answer some of his peers' questions. Quite a number of them brought me snacks during lunchtime. A particular one usually came to class early to chat with me. Most of them were not good at math, but they put in the effort and showed grit, which I really appreciate. It was because of them that I did not go insane and burst out like Wittgenstein, although the ending was similar without violence on my part. After this teaching job, I looked for a proper full-time job for months. Either the market was exceptionally brutal, or I was barely useful in any industry. I got nothing at all. I tried going back to biotechnology and HVAC estimation, and I got a handful of interviews with no success. I tried polishing my skills in data science, IT support, cybersecurity, and embedded system programming, yet only having a bachelor's degree in physics, daily driving Arch Linux, programming in C with Vim, and speaking the 3 most useful languages in Vancouver did not cut it anymore. I was at a point of taking any job that paid more than minimum wage. I ended up working in a wood veneer shop at the end of August, moving heavy plywood, taping veneer cracks, and trimming products with a router for 2 weeks. But then I was released, probably because I injured myself a little bit multiple times and had a really exhaustive face at the end of each shift. So, while continuing my cute little project of building an encrypted command line messenger over a local network in almost raw C, I had to look into the jobs I never wanted to return to just to make ends meet, namely full-time teaching. However, because of my poor relationships with past principals, none of the interviews turned into job offers. Out of frustration, I decided to look for a part-time tutoring job first, while planning to apply for a Bachelor of Education program so I can build a more stable career. Nevertheless, deep down I yearned for a bigger and more abstract challenge. That is why I tried my luck by reaching out UBC and SFU just to see if redeeming myself from a poor academic record was possible. A week after the cold emails were sent, SFU replied. While they politely thanked me for my interest in pursuing graduate studies at SFU, the answer was a clear no. To top it off, they recommended that I get advice on how to make myself a stronger candidate from my home university, given that I had clearly mentioned I immigrated from Hong Kong to Canada a few years ago. Despite how heartbreaking it was, This was nothing new to me. The physics department and quite a number of professors I reached out to for help at HKUST had told me to face reality and know my own place. They were not necessarily bad people, but with scarce time, energy, and most importantly, funding, who would want to take care of a mediocre student with no promise of success? But to my surprise, I received a very different kind of reply from UBC. On 27th of November 2025, I received an email from UBC. It was not just a generic message. It was a short note from a professor asking if I want to meet in person within the coming 2 weeks. I quickly accepted, and we emailed back and forth over the next few days to sort out the time and place. Then, on 4th of December 2025, I stepped onto the UBC campus for the very first time in my life. I still remember it was a rainy day. I arrived half an hour early and found a seat in the Tim Hortons right next to the math department. I sat there, constantly contemplating what to say so I would not sell myself short. When the time came, I walked into the math department, stepped onto the squeaking stairs, and knocked on the professor's door. Entering his office, I saw a stack of number theory books and a few, as I now know, Dalfentin equations on his whiteboard. We started our conversation. After some discussion, we concluded that I could try to apply for non-degree studies and register for Math 220 mathematical proof as an entry point. However, he also noted that there was no guarantee I could get into higher-level courses, like Math 320 or above, due to the very limited seats reserved for math undergraduates on the honors track. But, he added, if I performed well, there might be some wiggle room to squeeze in an extra seat. This particular comment stuck in my mind. Fast forward, 5 months passed. Although there were some hiccups, I ended up smoothly submitting my application for non-degree studies and the Bachelor of Education program at UBC. I was accepted as an unclassified student for the summer session. There was no challenge registering for Math 220, so 11th of May 2026 was my first lecture. Thus, after almost 6 years, I finally went back to university to be a student again. It turned out that going back to school at the age of 29 was not a trivial task, especially when I looked around and saw that most of my classmates were approximately 8 to 10 years younger. Instead of feeling a few steps ahead due to years of wandering the field of advanced mathematics by myself, through the lecture series, The Geometric Anatomy of Theoretical Physics delivered by Friedrich Schüler, The Road to Reality written by Roger Penrose, A Comprehensive Introduction to Differential Geometry written by Michael Spivak, Algebra written by Serge Lang, and various pieces of sporadic knowledge I acquired about Gödel's incompleteness theorem and Wittgenstein's philosophy of logic and language, I felt I was far behind the curve because I knew full well how shaky my foundation was. No doubt I could ramble about the real projective plane, mention fiber bundles, or throw around big terminologies like cohomology and Dinkin diagrams, but without concrete mathematical content, all of that talk would just be gibberish. Plus, I figured people who were interested in mathematics knew these things too, so I tend to keep quiet and observe. The result? They were all doing cool stuff in their own way. One computer engineering student built a full functioning eye tracker through Claw 1 hour before the lecture. One physics and math major student casually talked about the material of condensed matter physics, of which I had absolutely no idea, given I held a full physics degree. Another computer science student was exploring the application of Basel identity, while I had only proved it once and still barely grasped the big picture of it. That is why I felt I was lagging so far behind. But speaking of lagging behind, I don't think that was something new to me. In fact, I was chronically slower than everyone else. When I was in kindergarten, while other classmates were mingling and sharing toys, I was crouching on the floor staring at my knees. While I was in primary school, my mother had to bring me to a long flight of stairs to count and understand basic arithmetic. My sister, who was 3 years younger than me, could solve word problems like Bob is 5 years older than Tom, Tom is 3 years younger than his older brother, if Tom's older brother was 17 7 years ago, what is Bob's age now? Very quickly and without hesitation, whereas I would stare at the problem for a whole hour with zero progress. By the time I was in secondary school, because algebra was introduced, my performance in mathematics drastically improved. In fact, I constantly scored in the top 3 to 5 in the whole grade. The problem was, I got too cocky and choked on the public exam, which led me to community college. Then after getting my associate degree in engineering, since I transitioned to physics, I had to start from year 2 instead of year 3 at university, which slowed me down by 1 year. Not only that, but because I was so stubborn to give up on the theoretical physics path, I took a gap year before my final year, hoping that I could learn some advanced topics by myself to smoothly bridge my way to a graduate research opportunity. This cost me another year. Afterward, while political movements and the coronavirus were the headlines in Hong Kong throughout my final year, I noticed I did not stand a chance with graduate program applications. So I took a biotechnology research assistant job offer and stayed there for almost a year. However, I was pretty unhappy about it, so after that, I chose to immigrate to Canada. Shortly after my arrival, I got a job offer as an HVAC estimator. 10 months later, because it became more and more dreadful to get up in the morning, go to work, count the fans and diffusers, and compile quotations for contractors every single day, I resigned. Then, I got a part-time astronomy lab assistant job at a college. Meanwhile, I got scammed while seeking another full-time job, which almost drained my bank accounts to zero. But I survived that and picked up another part-time job as a math and science tutor, only to be told that I had been overpaid the entire time and needed to pay the money back to them, which again almost brought me to bankruptcy. I survived that again and was recruited to become a full-time high school teacher at an independent school. 1 year later, the school was downsizing and I got laid off. Then I found another school, which connects back to the timeline of when I was fired. If I had been less stubborn and taken the conventional path, I would at least be a senior in a respected field by now, earning a decent living and on my way to buying an apartment. But here I am. Given all of the things that I had experienced, feeling like an ape in the lecture hall was honestly not that bad. I mean, yes, they were really quick to respond to the professor's questions while I was still staring at the definitions on the blackboard. Yes, several of them were always a homework assignment and 2 chapters ahead of the lecture pace, and yes, some of them used proof by contradiction for everything and got things done really quickly, while I was pondering why intuitionists shy away from it and whether I should adopt the same mentality. Ultimately, I was playing a different game. I was not fighting for the grade itself, I was fighting for the potential wiggle room that might come in handy when things turned south. Therefore, it did not matter whether I was a potato in the class, as long as I produced work in which the TAs could not find a single error. I would never lose points. And since I had experience being on the other side of the paper, before the professor or the TA scrutinized my work, I deeply criticized and questioned my own work first. Every logical step was investigated, every symbol was checked twice, and every feeling of uncertainty had to be addressed. But even with such a mentality, I lost 1 point on my first homework, half a point on the first midterm, and then 3 points on the second homework. So I pushed harder, not by working on more problems, but by working on the same problem sets again and again until I got a flawless run. I deliberately did the calculation twice before writing it down. I put extra effort into the familiar sections where I tended to make silly mistakes. Everything had to be airtight. Then, I got full marks on the third homework, though 1 point got deducted on my second midterm because of an unforgivable mistake I made under pressure. This was followed by 1 point deducted on the fourth and fifth homework respectively. I took all of the mistakes and insufficiencies to heart. Again, I remind myself, good enough was not what I was here for. Mathematics cares about flawless logic and airtight reasoning. There was no excuse to settle for an imperfect argument. Funny enough, while I was wrestling with myself to squeeze out perfect proofs, I received an email about my Bachelor of Education application. I got rejected, because I realized that I would never go back anyway, even if I had to find another path. And now I had a chance to prove it. Time flew by, and on 18th of June 2026, the last day of the Math 220 lecture, I received a letter from the Teaching Regulation Branch in British Columbia. In the letter, they remind me that I had to renew my teaching certificate or otherwise an additional fee would be charged. I looked at it, chuckled a bit, and then threw the letter away into the recycling bin. Why would I ever go back when rigor and logical thinking are not respected, and grade inflation is the first priority to shovel students into university at all costs. Yet, this letter further highlighted the importance of the final exam, because the moment I choose not to keep my teaching certificate, there was no turning back. With the roughly 96 to 97% I had earned on my homework and midterm, the final exam, which makes up at least half of the course grade, was the actual final boss. It was 26th of June 2026, and the time had finally come. It was a rainy day again, and this time I was at the exam venue to prove not just mathematical statements, but also to prove that I was worthwhile to stay in the game a bit longer. As everyone settled down in the lecture hall, the clock turned to 12 p.m. flat, and the final exam began. It was a 2.5-hour exam, 8 questions with 70 total marks. The first few questions were simple but tricky. I paid extra attention to make sure I did not make any silly errors like I had in the previous 2 midterm exams. Things went smoothly, as expected. As the exam gradually progressed, I encountered a simple question worth 2 points. Assume f is a function from a to b and g is a function from b to c. Determine whether g after f being injective implies f is injective. Obviously the statement was true, so I wrote down the setup and tried to prove it, until I realized I was stuck. It was so free, I should be able to get it, I told myself. But no matter how hard I tried, I could only come up with a hand-wavy argument, and I was not satisfied. 10 minutes passed, and I was still drawing diagrams on my scratch paper, searching for that one statement I needed to finish the proof. I was literally sweating, but I had no time to take off my windbreaker. More than an hour had already passed for the whole exam, so I had to move on to the later questions. Otherwise, I might sacrifice the high-value long questions just to gain these 2 points. I whited out the hand-wavy part of the proof and moved on to the next question. It was a quick one. Then, the annoyance kept luring me back to the unfinished proof. I decided to give it 5 more minutes. If I still could not get it, I would have to leave it until the end. With various arguments racing through my head, searching for any snippet of lectures that might help, I finally got it. I was so relieved, but then I realized I was almost halfway through the exam, and I still had 4.5 questions to go. I was behind the schedule. From then onward, I went full send, squeezing every bit of brain power to push my progress. I wrote the sentences faster to gain a few seconds, double-check each step while writing to shave off a few extra half seconds, and preload the necessary proof formats in parallel so that I did not miss any details while speed-running the algebra. Then the next hurdle came. This time, it was the limit approaching negative infinity at negative infinity. There was no problem writing the statement in quantifiers, but my alarm bells rang because of the negative signs. Since the question involved a quadratic function, solving it meant dealing with a square root, which is highly sensitive to negative signs. I had to slam on the brake and downshift just to safely navigate this obstacle. Once I sketched the graph on my scratch paper, internally argued about the edge cases, and double confirmed that all of the steps were logically linked, I wrote down the proof, thoroughly checked it once more, and quickly moved on. The rest involved equivalence classes and double induction, which, although I was still sweating the whole time, presented no major hiccups at all. I kept up to speed with extra caution to make sure I did not choke at the end. Finally, I finished the whole paper with around 8 minutes left to polish my work. I caught a missing short phrase and cleared up the final bits of bad handwriting at the final moment, and then time was up. I stepped out of the building, gasping for the fresh air I needed to cool the heat in my skull. What an insane run, I said to myself. Since I did not have much else to do, I went for lunch and enjoyed the rest of the day. Usually, it takes a week for the TAs to grade the papers, so I assumed it would take about a week for my grade to be posted to the system. 3 days later, I received an email from the professor. It was a reply to the thank you note I sent, expressing my appreciation for her kindness in patiently answering my questions and providing book recommendations for my summer self-study. At first, I treated it as a standard email exchange of mutual appreciation, but when I read it a second time, I spotted something strange. She congratulated me on the near-perfect term. Wait, was my grade already out? I immediately logged it into my account, struggled for a moment to navigate to the correct page, and finally saw my score displayed on the screen. An A+, a grade I'd never achieved in my entire bachelor's degree. Even more shocking was the final percentage, a whopping 99%. Before I allowed myself to celebrate, I went to confirm one more thing. I opened a Google Sheet and meticulously calculated what I must have earned on the final exam, given that I did not have direct access to the graded paper. I arrived at the conclusion that I would have needed a perfect score to reach 99%. Even being 1 mark short would have made it impossible. I had done it. I had achieved the perfect run I had set out to complete. I proved that I'm not just another wannabe daydreaming about being a genius in front of a chalkboard. I'm serious about pure mathematics, to the point where I'm willing to plow through any obstacle in my way. So what is the next step? With this first major checkpoint achieved, it seems like this A+ is proof of concept that I'm not a complete idiot, which eases my self-criticism a bit. But this is far from the end. Once I sent a couple of emails updating the professor I talked to back in December and the mathematics undergraduate chair. If all goes well, I'll be taking Math 320, Real Variables 1, Math 321, Real Variables 2, Math 323, Introduction to Group Theory, and Math 323, Introduction to Rings and Modules over the upcoming winter terms. These courses are famously challenging, and I do not dare to underestimate them. Therefore, the rest of the summer, I'll be reading Principles of Mathematical Analysis by Rudin, Algebra by Artin, and a few more supplementary books recommended by my Math 220 professor. My students will usually let slip a comment like, "Teacher, you're really good at math." In fact, it could not be further from the truth. Jim Simon was really good at math. Gertie Pediment is definitely good at math. And Terence Dow can actually be called good at math. But me? If there was an ELO rating system for mathematics, I do not even know whether I could reach 1,000 right now. I'm not saying that getting up to their level is outright impossible, because I do not have a concrete proof for that. Regardless, it is not because I'm good at mathematics that I pursue it. It is just because, out of all the possibilities I had wrestled with throughout my 20s, mathematics happens to match my proclivity for abstraction, obsession with detail, and love of formalism. This reminds me of a quote from Vagabond. "Everything has been perfectly decided by the universe, therefore you are completely free." I'm entering into my 30s completely free, because I spent the past 10 years cultivating the soil to align with my true nature. No more unrealistic fantasies, no more toxic family, and no more religious ideology. With all these preparations closing a chapter, a new chapter begins.